Bubbles are not the only form in which reflexivity manifests itself. They are only the most dramatic and the most directly opposed to the efficient market hypothesis. Therefore, they deserve special attention. But reflexivity can take many other forms. In currency markets, for instance, the upside and downside are symmetrical, so that there is no sign of an asymmetry between boom and bust. But there is no sign of equilibrium either. Freely floating exchange rates tend to move in large, multi-year waves. And the most important and most interesting reflexive interaction takes place between the financial authorities and financial markets. Because markets don't tend towards equilibrium, they are prone to produce periodic crises. Financial crises lead to regulatory reforms. That's how central banking and the regulation of financial markets have evolved. Both the financial authorities and market participants act on the basis of imperfect understanding, and that makes the interaction between them reflexive and unpredictable. While bubbles only occur intermittently, the interplay between authorities and markets is an ongoing process. Misunderstandings by either side usually stay within reasonable bounds because market reactions provide useful feedback to the authorities, allowing them to correct their mistakes. But occasionally, the mistakes prove to be self-validating, setting in motion vicious or virtuous circles. Such feedback loops resemble bubbles in the sense that they are initially self-reinforcing, but eventually self-defeating. But otherwise, they take quite a different shape. It's important to realize that not all price distortions are due to reflexivity. Market participants can't possibly base their decisions on knowledge. They have to anticipate the future, and the future is contingent on the decisions that people have not yet made. What those decisions are going to be and what effect they will have can't be accurately anticipated. Nevertheless, people are forced to make decisions. To guess correctly, people would have to know the decisions of all of the other participants and their consequences, but that's impossible. Rational expectations theory sought to circumvent this impossibility by postulating that there is a single correct set of expectations and people's views will converge around it. That postulate has no resemblance to reality, but it is the basis of financial economics as it's currently taught in universities. In practice, participants are obliged to make their decisions in conditions of uncertainty. Their decisions are bound to be tentative and biased. That's the generic cause of price distortions. Occasionally, the price distortions set in motion a boom-bust process. More often, they are corrected by negative feedback. In these cases, market fluctuations have a random character. I compare them to the waves sloshing around in a swimming pool as opposed to a tidal wave. Obviously, the latter are more significant, but the former are more ubiquitous. The two kinds of price distortions intermingle so that in reality, boom-bust processes rarely follow the exact course of my model. Bubbles that follow the pattern I described in my model occur only in those rare occasions when they are so powerful that they overshadow all the other processes going on at the same time. It will be useful to distinguish between near equilibrium and far from equilibrium conditions. The near equilibrium conditions are characterized by random fluctuations, and the far from equilibrium situations are those in which a bubble predominates. Near equilibrium is characterized by humdrum everyday events which are repetitive and lend themselves to statistical generalizations. Far from equilibrium conditions give rise to unique historical events where outcomes are generally uncertain but have the capacity to disrupt the statistical generalizations based on everyday events. The rules that can guide decisions in near equilibrium conditions don't apply in far from equilibrium situations. The recent financial crisis is a case in point. All the risk management tools and synthetic financial products that were based on the assumption that price deviations from a putative equilibrium occur in a random fashion broke down, and people who relied on mathematical models which had served them well in near equilibrium conditions got badly hurt. I have gained some new insights into far from equilibrium conditions during the recent financial crisis. As a participant, I had to act under immense time pressure, and I couldn't gather all the information that would have been available. And the same applied to the regulatory authorities in charge. That's how far from equilibrium situations can spin out of control. And this is not confined to financial markets. I experienced it, for instance, during the collapse of the Soviet Union. The fact that the participants' thinking is time-bound instead of timeless is left out of account by rational expectations theory. I was aware of the uncertainty associated with reflexivity, but even I was taken by surprise by the extent of the uncertainty in 2008. It cost me dearly. I got the general direction of the markets right, but I didn't allow for the volatility. As a consequence, I took on positions that were too big to withstand the swings caused by volatility, and several times I was forced to reduce my positions at the wrong time in order to limit my risk. I would have done much better if I had taken smaller positions and stuck with them. I learned the hard way that the range of uncertainty is also uncertain, and at times it can become practically infinite. Uncertainty finds expression in volatility. Increased volatility requires a reduction in risk exposure. This leads to what Keynes called increased liquidity preference. This is an additional factor in the forced liquidation of positions that characterize financial crises. When the crisis abates and the range of uncertainty is reduced, it leads to an almost automatic rebound in the stock market as the liquidity preference stops rising and eventually falls. That's another lesson that I have learned recently. I also need to point out that the distinction between near and far from equilibrium conditions that I've mentioned was introduced by me while trying to make some sense out of a confusing reality, and it doesn't accurately reflect reality. Reality is always more complicated than the dichotomies we introduce into it. The recent crisis is comparable to a 100-year storm. We have had a number of crises leading up to it. These are comparable to 5 or 10-year storms. Regulators who had successfully dealt with the smaller storms were less successful when they applied the same methods to the 100-year storms. These general remarks prepare the ground for a specific hypothesis I have put forward to explain the recent financial crisis. It's not derived from my theory of bubbles by deductive logic. Nevertheless, the two of them stand or fall together. So here it goes.